All right. That's all the news and notes that happened over the weekend. Let's talk about George Pickens, because his name was brought up not once but twice by two NFL insiders about the future of George Pickens and what nearly happened during the NFL draft. And I think both are very, very interesting. We'll start with Jeremy Fowler, who used to cover the Pittsburgh Steelers, still has a very good grip on the Pittsburgh Steelers and where things are and how they get places. And look, Jeremy Fowler is not in the building, but I can tell you he's definitely got voices in that building. He's definitely got insight into what is happening in UPMC Rooney Sports Complex. I've always believed that one. He said this one over the weekend on NFL Live, quote, "I was told in the end, George Pickens in the end wants to be in Pittsburgh, sort of flirted with a trade request, but he loves Mike Tomlin and wants to be part of things moving forward." Flirted with a trade request. I do not know the background to this. I do not know how it came up. I do not know what flirting with a trade request is for George Pickens, or when it happened, or why it didn't happen. I will say that I do not think George Pickens and the Pittsburgh Steelers are in a place where the Steelers are so attractive that you don't want to leave Pittsburgh. Why wouldn't you want to leave Pittsburgh if you're a wide receiver, especially one that's entering a contract year who could get paid a boatload of money a year from now? If you're George Pickens, you got to be looking at it going, Mason Rudolph isn't going to make me nearly as much as many other quarterbacks in the NFL. Will Howard's not going to make me nearly as much as many other quarterbacks in the NFL. Maybe Aaron Rodgers does, but Aaron Rodgers isn't here. He hasn't signed a deal. And I think that the Steelers are aware Aaron Rodgers is coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I don't know if everybody in that locker room does. I know Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, they're aware of the situation. I would imagine DK Metcalf's aware of the situation. I don't know if George Pickens is in those meeting rooms, in those exclusive texts, having those very secret, important conversations. I don't know if that's part of the deal. I don't. And if I'm George Pickens, I would want out of here. I think that George Pickens is going to make a boatload more money next season if he has a great year this year, and probably needs a different quarterback to do so. Now, if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, I want to keep him. Why wouldn't you want to keep him? I would want George Pickens here this year, and if he behaves well and there's no off the field issues, I want him here next year and the year after that and the year after that. Him and DK Metcalf sound like a very dangerous duo. And I think that the Steelers are very open to trading him, but I also think that at this point in time, they've had a turn of events. They've had a change of mindset, and they really, truly are thinking about keeping George Pickens if things work out. But George might be considering moving on. I don't know. Again, you hear George Pickens and flirted with a trade request. My biggest pullback on this is George Pickens does not seem to be a mild-tempered, really lay things out type of guy. He seems to be an all-in sort of individual. And if that's the case, flirted with the trade request, maybe. But I feel like if TJ Watt, okay, and again, this is all hypotheticals. I'm playing tinfoil hat right here. If TJ Watt's got the cojones to put the peace sign up on Instagram and stir all sorts of nonsense, and the nonsense had to be there because he never pulled back on it. There's never this is nothing. He could have tweeted out a boatload of stuff. He could have posted another picture on Instagram. He's done none of it. He's looked at it and said, I knew exactly what I was doing. It was supposed to do what it did, and it worked. And it worked. George Pickens has deleted all the Steelers stuff from his Instagram before. George Pickens has called out Kenny Pickett on Instagram before. George Pickens has done all of these things. You're telling me that if he's flirting with a trade request, if he's having thoughts of leaving, he's just going to stay quiet in the matter? He's not going to, there's just nothing that sparks that conversation. It's just, you know what? I'm ready to go. We're going to think about it. If there's no reason to ask for a trade request, I have a hard time thinking that there is any thought of a trade request. And George Pickens and the Pittsburgh Steelers, if they have had any conversations about a contract extension, they are very minimal conversations, and they have not gone very far. The Steelers at this point, have not been focused on signing George Pickens long term. They're focused on TJ Watt and Aaron Rodgers. They want both of those two deals done before they even consider what they can offer George Pickens long term. So I don't know why that would start. And to be honest, it's May. So it's not a time in the year where if you haven't engaged in those conversations and you understand the pecking order, there's no place to be upset. Well, James Palmer tossed this one out here. He said on Bleacher Report, quote, his time in Pittsburgh in a lot of people's minds is limited. It has not gone well behind the scenes between George Pickens and the Pittsburgh Steelers and everybody involved. And this is leading up to, could he play for them in 2025? Certainly could. Would he be departing after this season? Yes, in a lot of people's minds. I, again, do not hold the same ground where we sit here today. Do I think that there is a chance he is dealt or a chance that he is let go after the season? Certainly. But the whole George Pickens going to play on the last year of his deal and then get paid next offseason thing, to me, doesn't make sense. It doesn't, because that would mean the Pittsburgh Steelers have to tell George Pickens, you are not getting a contract extension. Do you want to know what wide receivers in the NFL do when they are told that they are not going to get a contract extension, except for T. Higgins? As the only case, it's the only one that you could look at and say he's a high pedigree player who isn't going to get paid, who is somehow okay with just continuing to get screwed over until he finally got his long-term deal. Outside of that, everybody does the same things. I'm getting paid before the final year of the deal. I'm getting paid before the final year of the deal. That's how this is going down. George Pickens has got to be in that same group because George Pickens deserves to get paid. I mean, people could say George Pickens isn't a wide receiver one. He sure as hell puts up wide receiver one numbers. The dude's got just under 3,000 yards in 3 seasons. His worst season is 800 yards as a rookie. He's got an 1,100-yard year. George Pickens is a stud. He deserves to get paid. And he's played with literally nobody at quarterback. His quarterback list, he's played with 5 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. That quarterback list is Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, Russell Wilson, and Justin Fields. I don't think it gets worse than that unless you play in Cleveland. That's the only place it might be worse. And he still put up fantastic numbers year after year after year. He's a guy who should get a contract. I don't see the Pittsburgh Steelers paying him next offseason. I truly think that if they are going to sign him, it would be this year. And it would be okay, let's get the deal done now type of situation. But that's where it gets very interesting. Because if they're going to hold on to him for the final year of his deal, that means George is okay with that situation. But if George is flirting, and again, like I'm crossing paths here. I've spent 24 hours thinking about this. I had the conversation with my wife at dinner last night about just laying it all out, seeing if it made sense. That's how much it's been on my mind. If George Pickens was flirting with the idea of leaving Pittsburgh and instead chose to stay, to push it out to stay in Pittsburgh, but the Steelers do not view him as a long-term option, did they just not talk? Was nobody aware of how the other side felt in this situation? No, I don't think that's how it went down. I have a hard time believing that's how it went down. What I've been told is that the Steelers truly believe that there's a shot that they sign him long-term and that they hand him an extension this offseason. I don't know how close they are to that. I think there's a lot of factors that still dive into that to make that decision. But where we stand today, I get it. Months ago, the Steelers are trading George Pickens. The Steelers are trading George Pickens. I only relay the information given. The information given was I got a phone call 2 days after the season ended that said the Pittsburgh Steelers are very interested for the right price getting rid of George Pickens. Now I don't know what happened, but somewhere along the way that changed, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are very open to keeping George Pickens. They want that situation. I don't know if it's financial. I don't know if it was a good conversation with George. I have no idea how things went down, but I do know the mindset changed. So to sit here and say that his time is limited, possibly, definitely, potentially, but I don't think I think it's almost a zero chance that George Pickens plays the final year of his deal in Pittsburgh, because I just don't see him being that cordial about the situation. I don't see the Pittsburgh Steelers being that cordial about the situation. I think if they're going to get rid of him, it's going to be this offseason, not next. Again, all the information or all the reports over the weekend say otherwise. I don't know what they're hearing. I don't know where they're hearing it from. I don't know when they're hearing it. I don't know if James Palmer or Jesse Palmer, whatever his name is, excuse me for that one, but if he heard all of this weeks ago, months ago, and is just continuing to latch on to it, potentially. A lot of people do that. But if this is new information, it's interesting to know where it came from, because I do not know I do not have that same set of information. I've heard, and I mean, me and Chris Carter were on the Locked On podcast last Thursday, I want to say, talking about George Pickens and talking about how we've both heard the same things, that he is more likely going to stay in Pittsburgh. 2 weeks ago, I had him on this show and said, overreaction, he's going to stay. And Chris said, yeah, I've heard the same things. I don't know where it's going. I have no idea. What I do know is that flirting with the trade request and then the Steelers not viewing him as a long-term option don't add up. Because if both of those scenarios were true, George would be gone. And I just don't see him leaving. Not right now. In the summer, he could. Certainly in the summer, he could. But where we stand today, too early. Information doesn't match. I just, again, do not see how this works out the way that these reports say it does. If I had to take a guess, George Pickens signs a 3-year deal this offseason to get him to 27 years old. It's worth $25 to $27 million a year. It's got a pretty decent signing bonus. And George stays, which if you asked me 2 months ago, I would have predicted George Pickens is gone for a second-round pick. And again, I'm only changing course because I go off the information told to me, and the information told to me has changed. And that's how the Steelers operate. For anybody who says flip-flop and all that stuff, look at if you want to dive into an NFL organization, that's what happens constantly, is they are always having conversations and constantly changing the narratives and reworking things to say, okay, this is what we want to do right now. Okay, since then, this has changed, this has changed, this has changed. We need to recalibrate. When we recalibrate, now it looks like this. That's how it works. Time changes so many things in the NFL, and I think that's what it did with George Pickens. Could be wrong, but I think that's what it did with George Pickens.